In battle, the Klingons shout their names before striking. They welcome death with open arms. To them, a good day to die is the best kind of day. But to Earth's most legendary tactician, this is foolishness. All warfare is based on deception, or so Sun Tzu says. The Klingon Empire spans centuries. Their warriors are feared across quadrants. But they fight for honor, not necessarily for victory. What happens when a civilization is driven by glory, but blind to strategy? What if the Klingons read the art of war? Would they win more battles? Would they become unstoppable? Or would they cease to be Klingons at all? The first lesson in the art of war isn't about weapons, soldiers, or even terrain. It's about lies. According to Sun Tzu, war is won not with strength, but with trickery. Confuse your enemies, mislead them, appear weak when you are strong, and strike where they least expect it. Now let's talk about the Klingons. In Klingon culture, deception is not strategy, it's cowardice. They face their enemies head on. They declare their intentions. They announce their arrival. Even their warships growl with visible pride. Stealth is an afterthought. And yes, Klingons have cloaking devices, but they don't use them like Sun Tzu would. To him, cloaking would be just the beginning, a tool in a much larger strategy of misdirection, psychological pressure, and manipulation. But for Klingons, cloaking is a drumbeat before the battle. It's not subtle, it's a roar in silence. They still decloak and charge forward, because to them, deception is acceptable only if it leads to glory. Where Sun Tzu would say, "Win without fighting," a Klingon would counter, "Fight with honor, or don't fight at all." Compare this to the Romulans, masters of subterfuge. Their entire war doctrine could have been lifted straight from Sun Tzu. But the Klingons? They look you in the eye, shout their name, and hope they die in glory. This is more than a tactical gap. It's a cultural one. Sun Tzu teaches that the wise general makes himself unreadable. Klingons want to be read. They want to be understood. Because understanding their honor is what gives them meaning. Take Worf, perhaps the most thoughtful Klingon we've seen. Even he struggles with Starfleet's use of subterfuge. He's uncomfortable with Section 31, hesitant about anything less than direct, honorable combat. When he learns of secret missions, covert surveillance, or moral compromises for strategic gain, he doesn't react with curiosity. He generally reacts with disgust. And yet, time and again, Worf chooses to stay in Starfleet. Why? Because deep down, he knows there's a kind of power and subtlety, one his people have never embraced. The Federation wins battles with science, diplomacy, and deception. Klingons win with blood, but Starfleet is still standing. The Klingon Empire continues to crumble. Worf may not like the Federation's methods, but he respects the results. Now imagine a Klingon fleet that fights silently. No name shouting, no pre-battle monologue, just a surgical strike. A psychological war. No one even knows they've lost, until it's already over. Would that be strength or heresy? Sun Tzu understood something dangerous. Rage is a weapon, but only if it's your enemies. He wrote, "If your opponent is of caloric temper, seek to irritate him." The Klingons are caloric incarnate. They don't just take the bait, they demand it be wrapped in fire. To goad a Klingon into battle is easy. To stop one once he's angry, that's nearly impossible. But Sun Tzu would ask, if your enemies can manipulate your anger, are you still the warrior, or just the weapon? And if you're just a weapon, are you truly in control? Or are you simply being used, again and again, by those who fight smarter than you ever will. For all their strength, for all their honor, what if the Klingons had been losing smart while winning loud? What if the most dangerous Klingon isn't the one who shouts, but the one who listens? Sun Tzu never met a Klingon, but maybe he didn't have to. The Klingon Empire was not built on patience. It was built on battle, on blade, blood, and the roar of the warrior. To a Klingon, the idea of winning a war without fighting, it isn't just strange, it's sacrilege. But Sun Tzu disagrees, and not softly. He doesn't just say that war is bad, he says it's inefficient, that the best commander wins before the battle begins. The true victory is measured not in glory, but in preservation. The supreme art of war is to subdue the enemy without fighting. Now let's be clear, this is not cowardice. Sun Tzu is not afraid of war. He simply believes that a commander who must resort to open battle has already lost several opportunities. Why destroy an enemy when you can absorb them? Why let cities burn, ships fall, and soldiers die if you can win through diplomacy, fear, or sabotage? But to Klingons, sabotage is the work of cowards. To poison a supply line, to disable a ship from the shadows, or to disrupt a campaign without offering battle, these are not seen as cunning, they're seen as theft. Victory is supposed to be earned in combat, not stolen in silence. And if you steal it, they say, you don't deserve it. This runs directly against the Klingon ideal. To a Klingon, victory without combat isn't a triumph, it's a robbery. You were denied the fight, denied the kill, denied the story. And without a story, there's no honor. Think of Gowron, the chancellor who led the Klingon Empire through some of its bloodiest conflicts. He often escalated wars to prove strength. Not because it was necessary, but because it was expected. Gowron reignited hostilities with the Federation, launched brutal campaigns into Cardassian space, and ignored diplomatic options to maintain political dominance. He died not in glorious battle, but in a duel, disgraced. All because he couldn't walk away from a fight that didn't need to happen. Now contrast this with Sun Tzu's ideal general, a man who destabilizes empires through alliance, who avoids direct confrontation because the cost is too high, who lets the enemy break themselves on terrain, delay, or fear. Sun Tzu teaches us that control, not chaos, is the path to domination. The Klingons, they often embrace chaos because chaos gives them the chance to prove themselves. But what if proof wasn't the goal? There are rare moments in Star Trek when Klingons almost embrace this thinking. In TNG The Emissary, K'Ehleyr is sent to deal with a Klingon sleeper ship, one still clinging to old wars. The challenge isn't physical, it's ideological. She tries to avoid combat, convince them peace has come, and ultimately lets Worf bluff his way into a bloodless solution. The mission succeeds. No one dies. But Worf doesn't leave proud. He leaves conflicted. Because even when you save lives, there's no song for deception. But Sun Tzu isn't concerned with songs. He's concerned with power. The art of war, to him, isn't a performance. It's an equation. And when the equation ends with fewer dead, fewer wasted resources, and the enemy surrendering before their ships even launch, that's victory. Klingons are taught that death in battle is the greatest honor. But Sun Tzu would ask, what's more honorable? Dying in a glorious last stand, or living to win again? And again. And again. What if conquest didn't require carnage? Sun Tzu saw war as a means to an end. The Klingons see war as an end in itself. And that difference is why they bleed more than they win. Imagine a Klingon Empire that valued precision over passion. that made enemies surrender through fear of what might come, not what already has. A silent empire, ruthless, restrained, and undefeated. That empire might not sing, but it would survive. The Klingon Empire has never lacked bravery. What it does often lack is self-awareness. In the art of war, Sun Tzu doesn't glorify strength. He glorifies insight. If you know the enemy and know yourself, you need not fear the result of 100 battles. But if you don't, for every victory gained, you will also suffer a defeat. For Klingons, the idea of self-knowledge is often buried beneath ritual, legend, and myth. Their culture tells them who they are. Warriors. That's enough. But Sun Tzu would say that knowing what you are is not the same as knowing why you fight, how you are fighting, and what weaknesses your culture refuses to acknowledge. Take Worf. When he joined Starfleet, he believes in a romanticized version of Klingon honor. One built from stories, not experience. Over time, he realizes that the Empire is not what he imagined. It's corrupt, highly politicized. It's shaped for more theatrics than the actual truth. And yet, he clings to its ideal. Worf knows his enemies, but he struggles to know himself, or even his people. This is a pattern across Klingon history. The Empire is often unprepared for enemies that don't fight like they do. They see cunning as cowardice, diplomacy as weakness. Delay, well, that's simply just fear. But Sun Tzu teaches that battles are won long before the first strike. You must study the enemy's habits, their motives. You must seek out what their limits are. And more importantly, you must know your own. If the Klingons had truly understood how the Cardassians fight, which is patiently, politically, and with an eye towards long-term survival, would they have charged in so recklessly? Perhaps they would have seen the trap forming. Perhaps they would have realized that a humiliated Cardassia wouldn't be conquered. It would seek protection, and the only protection left was the Dominion. If they'd understood the enemy, not just how they fight, but how they break, maybe the Federation wouldn't have had to come to their rescue at all. Maybe the war that followed could have been avoided before it ever began. In contrast, the Federation doesn't just train warriors. It trains diplomats, scientists, strategists. Starfleet doesn't rush into war because it's glorious. It avoids war because it understands the cost. When the Federation faces a new threat, its first instinct is not to attack, but to understand. They observe, analyze, debate. And when they do fight, it's usually because there's no other option left. Klingons react. The Federation prepares. One charges into battle shouting its name. The other scans the battlefield first. One sees restraint as weakness. The other sees it as a strength. This is not because the Federation is soft. It's because it knows itself. And in knowing itself, it becomes harder to defeat. Sun Tzu would admire a fleet that wins without ego, that calculates instead of postures, that walks away from wars it could win because it understands the consequences of those victories. Klingons want to conquer. The Federation wants to survive. And sometimes, that makes all the difference. Sun Tzu's wisdom demands reflection. What is my enemy's goal? What is my own? Are my tactics serving that goal, or just feeding my ego? How many times have Klingons fought battles just because they were supposed to? Imagine a Klingon Empire that trains its warriors not just in combat, but in observation, in analysis, in understanding enemies before they clash with them. Imagine an empire that prizes not just strength, but clarity. They would lose fewer ships, waste fewer lives, and conquer more than just territory. They'd conquer uncertainty. If you know the enemy and know yourself, Sun Tzu writes, you need not fear the result of 100 battles. But if you only know one side of the fight, you may not survive the second. Up to now, we've been talking about ideas, the kinds of lessons Sun Tzu might try to teach the Klingon Empire. But philosophy alone doesn't win wars. To see the real cost of ignoring these teachings, we have to leave theory behind and step into the battlefield. The rest of this story isn't necessarily about what the Klingons could learn. It's about the wars they fought, the victories they claimed, and the mistakes that almost destroyed them. Klingons are warriors, but more than that, they are emotional warriors. They fight with their hearts as much as their blades. And while passion can drive courage, it can also lead to disaster. Sun Tzu understood this. He warned, if your opponent is of choleric temper, seek to irritate him. In other words, if your enemy angers easily, you can make him destroy himself. The Klingons are a commander's dream in that regard. History shows us, again and again, provoke a Klingon and he'll give you the fight you want. He might even give it to you on your terms. The Dominion learned this quick. During the early months of the war, Klingon fleets rushed headlong into engagements meant to bleed them dry, leaving them overextended and vulnerable. It wasn't just the Dominion. Even the Federation, in the brief but bloody war with the Klingon Empire in 2373, used this to its advantage. Gowron's decision-making during that conflict was shaped almost entirely by pride. Pushing fleets into Cardassian space, escalating fights, and refusing to consider withdrawal. To him, backing down was weakness, but to his enemies, it was opportunity. But that's not to say the Federation came out of it unscathed. The conflict was brief, but it was brutal. Starfleet ships were forced into constant defensive engagements, losing worlds in the Arcanus sector and watching long-held colonies fall to Klingon control. At one point, Klingon forces even boarded Deep Space Nine in a direct assault, a confrontation seen in DS9, The Way of the Warrior. It took the station's upgraded defenses and Starfleet reinforcements to drive them off in one of the most intense ship-based battles of the series. Yes, the Federation understood the danger of Klingon pride, but understanding didn't erase the cost. Every counterattack bled ships from an already strained fleet, and every lost ship was one less to face the growing Dominion threat. In the end, both sides claimed victory, but both sides were weakened. The Klingons had proven their ferocity, the Federation had proven its resilience, and the Dominion had been handed a galaxy divided. We've seen it on the personal scale too. In Deep Space Nine, Worf's duels and challenges are often the result of deliberate provocation. An insult, question of honor, doesn't take much to force a Klingon into a fight. And once the fight begins, they're committed, no matter the odds or cost. Sun Tzu would see this as a fatal flaw. An opponent who fights when you want him to fight is an opponent you already control. The more pride the Klingons have in their courage, the more predictable the reactions become. And the more predictable they are, the easier they are to defeat. The irony is that the Klingons believe rage makes them dangerous, but in the eyes of a strategist, rage makes them vulnerable. A furious Klingon is still deadly in single combat, but in the arena of fleets, borders, and empires, fury burns faster than it kills. Imagine an empire that could keep its passion, but not be ruled by it. One that could feel the insult, but hold the blade until the moment mattered. That empire would still be feared, but it would also be harder to trap. If your opponent is of choleric temper, seek to irritate him. For centuries, that's exactly what the Klingon enemies have done, and too often, the Klingons have gladly walked into the snare. If there's one lesson from the art of war that might have changed the course of Klingon history, it's this one. Sun Tzu believed that victory isn't just about strength, it's about understanding. The Klingons have mastered the part about knowing themselves. They know their values, their honor code, their appetite for battle. But their enemies, that's another story. The Empire's wars are full of examples where they underestimated the way others fight. Against the Romulans, they struggled to counter deception and subterfuge. Against the Cardassians, they dismissed the defensive warfare as cowardice, only to find themselves bogged down in campaigns where victory brought little strategic gain. And against the Dominion, their focus on head-on engagement blinded them to the true scale of the threat. Klingon fleets were among the first to suffer catastrophic losses in the war, and many of those could have been avoided with deeper intelligence on how the Dominion built and sustained its forces. Knowing your enemy isn't just about ships and weapons. It's about knowing their limits, their political motives, even their culture. This is where the Klingons often stumble. To them, honor is universal, but to the Romulans, honor is survival. To the Cardassians, honor is service to the state. And to the Dominion, honor doesn't exist at all, only obedience. Sun Tzu would warn that without understanding these differences, you risk fighting the wrong war. You may win the battle you think you're in, but lose the one your enemy is actually fighting. The Federation learned this lesson in its own way. Starfleet Diplomatic Corps and Intelligence Services often do the work the Klingons refuse, studying their adversaries in detail, predicting moves before they're made. It's no accident that during the Dominion War, Starfleet's success hinged as much on outthinking the enemy as on outfighting them. The Klingons, by contrast, often relied on the Federation for that strategic foresight. One of the best illustrations of this comes from DS9 by Inferno's Light. While the Klingons were focused on the glory of open battle, the Dominion was quietly preparing to bring the Cardassians into the fold. When the trap was sprung, the Klingon fleet paid dearly for not seeing it coming, and the Dominion gained a new ally without firing a shot. In the Klingon mind, pausing to gather intelligence feels like weakness, but in Sun Tzu's philosophy, it's the ultimate form of strength. Every bit of knowledge about your enemy is a weapon, and the side that has the better arsenal of information will often win before the first shot is fired. The truth is, the Klingons could keep every ounce of their bravery and still become far more dangerous. If only they could learn to value knowing the enemy as much as they value knowing themselves. To Sun Tzu, deception wasn't just a tactic. It was the foundation of strategy. Mislead your enemy about your movements, your numbers, your intentions, and you force them to fight on your terms. But to the Klingons, deception is complicated. Klingon culture values the appearance of strength as much as strength itself. The ideal battle is an open contest, two sides meeting in honorable combat with no question about who struck the first blow. To cloak your numbers, to lure an enemy into a trap, to strike before they're ready, that is to court dishonor. This mindset explains why the Klingon cloaking device is used so differently than the Romulan one. For Romulans, the cloak is an extension of their philosophy, a tool to strike unseen, to vanish before a counterattack, to manipulate the flow of war without ever risking open battle. The Klingons, on the other hand, often use the cloak as a glorified ambush trigger. Decloak, fire, and charge headlong into combat. They see it less as a tool for deception, more as a way to make the first strike, rather than the unseen strike. The problem is that when your enemy knows exactly how you'll use your best trick, it stops being a trick at all. During the Dominion War, Jem'Hadar forces adapted quickly to Klingon decloak and charge tactics, learning to position themselves to absorb the first strike and then counterattack with devastating precision. Sun Tzu would argue that true deception is fluid. It changes to fit the moment. Sometimes that means hiding your numbers. Sometimes it means feigning weakness. And sometimes it means letting your enemy think they've won, right up until the point they've overextended themselves. The Klingons rarely employ this kind of patience. They would rather strike now and claim glory than wait and claim victory. That's a strength when fighting enemies who think the same way. But against the Romulans, the Cardassians, or the Dominion, it's a liability. Perhaps the most telling example comes from the Klingon-Romulan conflicts of the 23rd and 24th century. The Romulans routinely dictated the terms of engagement through misdirection, feeding the Klingons false intelligence, luring fleets into kill zones, and retreating before decisive action could be taken. Klingon commanders often responded with brute force, but brute force is exactly what the Romulans wanted them to use, because it was predictable. If the Empire truly embraced Sun Tzu's view that all warfare is based on deception, they might not only win more battles, they might win them without fighting at all. But in a society where victory without combat is seen as hollow, that's a lesson the Klingons have never been eager to learn. If there's one thing Starfleet has mastered that the Klingons still struggle with, it's adaptation. Klingon warfare is built on tradition, ritualized duels, fleet formations that haven't changed in centuries, and a worldview that measures a commander's worth by the battles they fought face to face. It's a style that inspires loyalty and courage, but it can also become a cage. The Federation, by contrast, evolves with each conflict. The doctrines are not carved into stone tablets. They are living documents, rewritten after every engagement, every mistake, every surprise. When the Dominion proved resistant to their tactics, Starfleet studied enemy ship schematics, reconfigured shield harmonics, and developed countermeasures for Polaron beams in record time. For the Klingons, such changes often come slowly, filtered through political rivalries and the inertia of century-old beliefs. Sun Tzu taught that the best armies are like water. They adapt to the shape of the ground they move across. For Starfleet, that means being willing to fight like a Klingon when the situation demands it. Bold, decisive, and direct, but also being ready to fight like a Romulan, using patience, deception, and information warfare. The Federation doesn't see these approaches as dishonorable. They see them as tools. The Klingon Empire has adapted before, most notably during the Dominion War, when they modified their cloaking tactics, deployed joint task forces with Starfleet, and even took on defensive positions when honor demanded patience. But each adaptation comes at a cultural cost. Every shift away from direct confrontation is a small erosion of the Klingon ideal, a reminder that the galaxy doesn't always allow for battles sung in the halls of Sto-vo-kor. The irony is that when Klingons do adapt, they are terrifyingly effective. Joint Klingon Federation raids on Dominion supply lines were among the most decisive operations of the war, crippling Cardassian shipyards and forcing the Breen to divert resources to protect convoys. When Klingons channel their aggression through the lens of flexible strategy, they can become exactly what Sun Tzu described, an unstoppable force that flows around obstacles rather than smashing against them. But the moment the war is over, tradition reasserts itself. Old rivalries flare, doctrines snap back into place, and the lessons learned fade into the background until the next great threat forces the Empire to remember them again. In the end, adaptation is not just about winning wars, it's about surviving the peace that follows. And in that arena, the Federation may hold the greatest advantage of all. Victory means something very different to the Klingons than it does to the Federation. For the Klingons, a war can be won even if territory is lost, so long as honor is preserved and battles are fought with courage. For the Federation, a war is not truly won unless peace is restored and lives are preserved. Both philosophies have strength, and both carry a price. Sun Tzu warned, there is no instance of a nation benefiting from prolonged warfare. He meant that even the strongest armies will bleed themselves dry if they fight without an end in mind. The Klingons, however, often measure greatness by the scale of the struggle itself, not the swiftness of its resolution. A long, glorious war can be worth more in legend than a quick, quiet victory, because stories endure longer than treaties. This difference in mindset can create strange alliances. During the Dominion War, the Federation sought the fastest, most efficient end to the conflict. The Klingons sought decisive battles that would live forever in song. The two approaches sometimes aligned, but just as often clashed. While Starfleet pushed for coordinated strikes to minimize casualties, the Klingons argued for bold offenses that risked fleets in order to break the enemy's will. The cost of this pride is steep. In battles where Klingons' honor dictated a frontal assault, the casualty rates were far higher than Starfleet would ever accept. And yet, in moments when that unrelenting aggression broke the enemy's line, even Starfleet had to admit that the Klingon way had its place. It's a dangerous balance, one that can turn a victory into a Pyrrhic one before anyone realizes it. Sun Tzu would say that the greatest victory is the one that requires the least fighting. The Klingons would say the greatest victory is the one most worthy of remembrance. The Federation seeks the future, the Klingons seek the legend. And when those two visions march together, they can change the course of the galaxy. But when they march apart, the galaxy itself becomes the battlefield. In the end, maybe we've been asking the wrong question. The Klingons aren't failed disciples of Sun Tzu. They are something else entirely. Warriors who follow a path closer to Bushido, the way of the samurai. Bushido taught that honor is worth more than life, that loyalty to one's lord, or in Klingon terms, one's house and chancellor, outweighs personal safety. It praised courage in the face of impossible odds, and condemned cowardice, even if it might bring victory. It saw the duel, the open challenge, as the purest form of combat. This is the Klingon way. Sun Tzu would win wars with minimal cost, striking from shadows if it served the goal. A Klingon would rather look their enemy in the eye, even if it meant their own death. One measures victory in survival, the other measures it in honor. And yet both have a legacy. Sun Tzu's lessons are written in ink, preserved, studied, passed down through generations. The Klingon lessons are written in blood, earned on the battlefield, sung in the halls of Sto-vo-kor. Together they tell the full story of war, the art of victory, and the will to face it head on. If Sun Tzu looked at the Klingon way of war, he might admire their courage, but condemn their waste. He'd see warriors dying in glorious battle. He'd see warriors dying in glorious but avoidable battles, ships announcing themselves before the strike, and honor placed above efficiency. In his eyes, that's not strategy. It's theater. But to the Klingons, Sun Tzu's way would be unworthy of a true warrior. What good is a victory if it's not earned in the crucible of open combat? What value is survival if you cannot sing about the battle that bought it? And so the two paths can never fully merge. One is the way of the ink brush, the other the way of the batlet. Both endure, both inspire, and both, in their own way, win wars.